Welcome again to the American Zarathustra show. We're going to be discussing Imperium Art with a very, very special guest, John from the musical duo Lilou and John in Sweden. We're extremely pleased to have him here today. How are you doing, John?
Well, it's terribly fine, thank you. How are you doing?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. It's exciting to talk to you. Also, we have my dear friend and the host of the Conversations with the Wind on the White Art Collective D-Live show, Nullus. How are you today, sir?
I'm fine, thank you very much. How are you?
Very good, very good. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about John and his music. Lilou and John.com, Lilou John.com. You can check out their music there. Really, really great music. I'm a huge fan of his music. I'm going to read you just a little bit about John. Some of his influences are The Clash, Motorhead, Dead Kennedys, Depeche Mode, Rammstein, Nina Simone. What an amazing mashup of incredible and very cool rebellious kind of art. I would even say that John's singing style for me sounds a lot like the Dead Kennedys. John, where did you get your cool singing style?
Funny you should ask that because it's not me who's singing.
Oh, who's singing?
It's Lilou.
Oh my God. Okay, well,
Yeah.
I guess I am
There's a lot of people.
corrected. There you go.
There's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who ask me the same question over and over again. Are you singing? No, I'm not singing. It's my wife singing.
So those are your lyrics.
She has.
What part do you play in the band?
I write the lyrics, and I write the lyrics. Most of them anyway, because we do most of the stuff together. And I make most of the arrangements, but we do that together a lot too. And I produce it, and we do a lot of that together too. But she does the singing.
Oh, wow. Well, fabulous voice, fabulous voice. My compliments go to Lilou. Something interesting on your site here about your music, you describe your music as doom pop, punk art, steampunk, neo-folk. These are really cool concepts. How did all that come together? Like, what's your angle on life that makes this kind of music?
We're individualists, both Lilou and I. We're very creative. We can't stand still. We're constantly moving. Especially Lilou, she's constantly on the move. She's on the move so much. So when we go to the shop, she refused to take the same route back to the flat. So we have to go another way because she refused to go the same way twice. So that's why we're constantly moving around. We're constantly changing, and that has led us into some problems along the way because people have a hard time explaining what we actually do. Stevens on America.org, he said that we nearly indescribable. And I guess that is, I stick to that because we always had the problem when we record an album. What should we call this style now?
Well, I'm going to leave a link to your website and your YouTube channel below. People have just got to listen to it for themselves and check it out. It's high energy, really interesting music, great stuff. So check that out. Now, we've invited John on the show for Imperium Art, really in a sense to be kind of the devil's advocate, to give us an objective point of view, to kind of test the data, to question us. So a lot of times on these shows, it's basically people agreeing with each other or expanding on current ideas. But John's really going to, try to throw a judo flip at us, see, what is Imperium Art? How does it relate to the White Art Collective, white identity politics, in general, all the issues that this show is about? So let me read some questions that John's prepared for us. First one, what is the difference between Imperium Art? Maybe we should back up a little bit. Nullus, do you want to give a brief overview of what Imperium Art is for new listeners?
Oh boy. I have to go over the key elements in my view, at least.
Yes.
So when I'm speaking of Imperium Art, essentially what I'm talking about is a meeting place, an existential place where people of European descent can congregate and find each other, so to speak,
Mm.
so that they can use this as a means and a tool to express their art, to learn from each other, to expand on their different artistic expressions, and to that end, the elements that I've described are based on various, I would say, various problems that I see in the current postmodern world, and that would be reflecting the repositioning the soul of the European man in Imperium art, or in art in general,
Mm.
contextualizing the relationship between ethnos, mythos, and logos in Imperium art.
Mm.
And then my next element is the collaboration of the continuum through the Imperium, and that continuum is that existential plane of existence that I'm talking about, where someone from Italy can meet someone from the United States, or from Spain can speak with someone from Sweden. And even though they might have different cultural traditions, they find common symbolism through Imperium art. They can find common themes and collaboration through Imperium art. And the other elements that I find very important is contextualizing the cultural, or what I call the culture insurgency, and achieving a cognitive dominance in that culture insurgency, and basically positioning ourselves to be without fear and being able to express our full emotional spectrum without fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then to this end, I transition to the dialectics of artistic violence, whereby I speak of the warrior poet. I would suggest listening to the last conversations with the Wind episode with Donald
I'll
for
put
a
the
little
link
bit.
below. I'll put the
Yeah,
link.
for that. Yeah, that really, we went into detail on that. Those, both the cognitive dominance and the dialectics of artistic violence, and I think that that would be an interesting show to listen to get a better idea of that. And ultimately, it's talking about the transcendental idealism of the Imperium. So what we're talking about here is really finding ourselves within this new Imperium and understanding ourselves in it, so that we can then understand ourselves as a collective, as a group of people of similar backgrounds, of similar race, of similar ethnicity, or at least related ethnicity, if one could say it that way,
Mm.
and forging the extended family within the artistic expression.
Mm. Beautifully said, and very well detailed as well. If I can add to that, just to help frame the whole conversation, I do try to put it simply that all this, for starters, is an observation. It's an academic observation of what is happening in the arts that comes from people who are woke to white identity politics, people who are aware of and responding to white genocide in all over the white diaspora. So the white diaspora is the Imperium. It's meant to be, from Francis Parker Yockey's point of view, sort of a giant global, like maybe a white globalism, if you will, or a European globalism, whereby we're all aware of our common DNA root, our common root, and specifically more or less about the crisis that we have of our enemies that are trying to invade, that are trying to replace us, both within and without our cultures. So it's essentially art that is related to white genocide in the most simplest terms. So I just got to mention, I hear a tremendous amount of banging in the background. I don't know if we're building a rocket ship somewhere, or I don't know if someone can put their mute on. That could help a little bit. But let me go right into the questions here. So, what is the difference between Imperium art and white art? So, John, maybe you could open up that question a little bit for us. Why would you ask that?
Well, because from your expression, from your description here, it sounds to me very much like you're talking about white art, um, basically. And I'm wondering, sort of, what is Imperium art different from white art? Because you talk about people of European descent,
Mm-hmm.
DNA roots,
Mm-hmm.
white European globalism, race, background, ethnicity. I mean,
Mm.
what is the difference then
Okay,
between
well,
that? Yeah.
I apologize. So I think white is very much a North American term for European, and so we do want to, let's just say European, people of European descent. So anybody who, let's say there's many people in the art world who are white or of European descent that are making degenerate art or art that deconstructs Western traditions, that insults or defames our general traditions, the things that created or embody Western civilization. So, they're white, but they're not making Imperium art. In fact, they're making the opposite of Imperium art in that they're destroying traditions, they're kind of insulting conventions that essentially are the backbone or the pillars of Western civilization. So, and any white person who is not aware of politics and makes a work of art, I wouldn't say that they made, quote, white art per se. And in the same way, say, let's say, a black person makes a work of art, it isn't, quote, black art. Although, for example, Native Americans often will make Native American art, like exquisitely and exclusively. They're very, very, very aware that they must use their own cultural symbols and that they own those symbols, and they even have laws against people not in their culture from stealing these symbols. And for example, I could go off on a tangent on that, but Imperium art would be more similar to the Native American view in that they protect their cultural symbols in order to protect their culture. And so does that help to clarify that? Do you feel that's a satisfactory answer?
Yeah, somewhat. What I hear is perhaps, are you talking about some kind of fascist globalist art here? Because sort of revitalizing sort of the white spirit, and like in the Native American tradition, sort of bringing back to the roots.
Mm.
Uh, would that be sort of an expression of what Imperium are? Because Imperium are,
Mm.
in my ears, it makes me think about the Roman Empire,
Mm-hmm.
or the Holy Roman Empire.
Correct.
And that brings my attention straight to Mussolini and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and an Italian fascist trying to sort of wake up the national spirit again, sort
Mhm.
of.
Yeah.
So that is the tradition that you are sort of pursuing here. Uh,
This
is
is
that
actually
correct?
this is a very, very good question. Um, I think that I first want to let Nullis give that a shot, and then I have a few things to say. Nullis, would you?
Yeah, it's a good question actually, and I don't really want to define art along political lines, only because the idea of Imperium art, in my view at least, should incorporate various degrees of interpretation culturally, socially, and politically.
Mm.
Um, I don't think that putting it in a box and calling it fascist art would be an accurate description of Imperium art. With that said, yes, there are elements in it that hark on that want to revive tradition, but in the sense of continuity, in the sense of understanding the context of our history and putting those threads or sewing those threads together. And that's not just a fascist approach. I mean, that's a reactionary approach. That's a traditionalist approach in the, if you want to use a political term in the Spanish politics, a traditionalist wasn't a fascist, they were a traditionalist. So I would say that, with that said, though, that of course it could include that as well. For me, the more elemental part of Imperium Art is also connecting our severed relationships with the divine, and also incorporating elements of understanding our relationship, that there are things that are greater than us, and these things that are greater than us include a higher cause, a higher purpose, a higher morality, for example, which I think is also important.
Yeah, so the word fascism is very misused these days. I think that studying, for example, Spanish fascism, Franco, these are movements of people who were trying to stop communism from taking root in their country, which is currently happening all over the Western world. And so I think that anybody who is anti-communist and trying to preserve their natural culture, their indigenous culture, I would never call that person a fascist. But at the same time, I think that we have to stop using the term fascist the way that the Antifa use it, the way that liberals use it, which is a misuse of the term. I think what they mean to say is like totalitarian or overly authoritarian in some way, where the state imposes its will on the people. And that's what communism does. So it's a classic communist device to take the thing they are doing and then blame their enemy for doing it. That's pill pull. That is obfuscation. They twist the truth around, and it confuses the enemy, makes them easier to destroy. So where we do have similarity with fascism historically is that we unapologetically are traditionalist European, and that we unapologetically wish to preserve our cultures and will do what is needed to do that. And so, see, the war has already begun.
Oh, that was the cat. Sorry.
Oh, hey, it's a cool cat. Nice to have the cat on the show. But anyway, I think it's for us as artists, we do look to fascist art for inspiration. There's something very bold, there's something very native European about it that I think is very empowering. And we need to send a message. Imperium Art needs to send an empowering message to our people to have a full sense of pride in their identity as Europeans. So I suppose that's the best answer we can kind of come up with for now. Imperium Art is evolving, but it's certainly, at this stage, I don't think you could say that it's fascist art. That would be inappropriate.
Yeah.
Does that help to answer the question for you?
Yeah. When I thought you would say traditionalist reactionary. Because yeah, that's what got into my mind. But
well,
as you say, the facet, yeah.
I apologize to cut you off, but you're right in this assumption, because the term imperium is associated with Francis Parker Yockey and fascism in some sense. So, but that brings us down to the question of ideal versus material. Like, how much is that ideological and how much of it is actual? So, I don't get really detailed here, but does that help?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. When you talk about the words, sort of they got a bad connotation, sort of fascism, for example.
Yeah.
When I use words, I never put any good or bad connotation into them. I use them. To me, they are strictly technical terms.
Okay.
So it was nothing negative in my question there. It was just technically it reminded of a fascist approach.
That's fine.
But yeah, but that leads me to another question here. If you have a traditionalist reactionary approach in Imperium Art, and there are inspiration from fascism in it, and cultural, not only political, but it's a cultural movement. What about when, for example, you get people into sort of the white art collective, etc., are not traditionalist reactionary or fascist, but they are more like white libertarians who will sooner or later find a way here. I'm halfway there. White capitalists.
Yes.
You will get anarchists, Marxists.
Yeah.
Coming in and want to be part of it, and they won't have nothing to do with Imperium Art. They will sort of have their own sort of set of ideas. What do you think about that? And where do you sort of how do you see them within, say, white art, Imperium Art?
All right. Nullus, may I take this first here? So this is a massive question. I suppose on the one hand, I would say that, you have to keep noticing that there's a root and there are the branches. And the root is anybody who is of European descent who is responding to white genocide. That's the most simple way to put it. The branches being, like you say, people who may not even be politically aware, but they're experiencing something in their life that is demoralizing them, replacing them, abusing them, or something of that nature that is related, obviously, to white replacement. So they have no awareness of or intent to be part of a, quote, imperium, or anything of that nature, yet they are making art of this kind. So that is the root of Imperium Art right there, is that people who are making art responding to, their white identity politics, if you will, whether they're aware of it or not. And this is where Nullus and I guess, we're imposing this title on it. My approach specifically is that we need to have an academic look at what's happening in the arts now, in the alt-right / dissident right. There's a lot happening. It's incredible. And it's growing and growing. More and more people are coming to the White Art Collective. There's probably very many other people still out there that are just doing traditionalist art, but are in some way doing it in the spirit against communism, against white replacement. And so the term Imperium Art maybe is, how do I say, maybe we're imposing that title, and there should be another title for it. I think my approach to it is to change our view of looking at each other as just a bunch of individuals, and looking at ourselves instead as part of a common European lineage. Does that help to clarify that question?
May I respond? Yeah.
I'd like to let Ellis respond a little bit to that. But
Absolutely. I would just like to comment that I don't think you should change the name Imperium Art. I think Imperium Art is a perfect name. But here's the thing. Imperium Art, as you say, is a part of it. You have the roots, and then you have the branches, and Imperium Art is one of the branches. I see a fear that if people come to the White Art Collective and they see, oh, they do Imperium Art. Okay, what is Imperium Art? Oh, they want they want this and this and this. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is traditionalist stuff. I'm no part of this,
Mm-hmm.
and then they won't come there. That is what I. That is what.
It's a good point. It's a
Yeah.
good point. Actually, there's Boxcar is a DJ in our group. I think you would know him probably. He's one of the folks in the White Art Collective, and he DJs. And he and I just had a tiny chat on Twitter last night where he was saying, I love a lot of modern art. I think it's very beautiful, and not everything has to be Roman sculptures and Baroque paintings or something. And I strongly agree with that. So this is something that we're still working out, and you're bringing up these questions is allowing us to do that. You have to put a spotlight on those weak areas in order to figure that out. And here, a guy who's just DJing and making sick beats, like he doesn't say anything about white identity politics, but he has made his home at the White Art Collective. And so that's a fascinating way to look at it. Is it Imperium art? That's testing the validity of the term. It's testing the definition of the term. I think above all, though, I want to say that we have to control our own artistic narrative before anyone else takes. Okay, so when eventually the White Art Collective gets big enough, and then the mainstream culture or the art world per se looks at it critically, they're going to look for data. And so we're producing that data in-house, so to speak, by having these conversations. And we define it. They don't define it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Nullus,
Yeah.
you want to chime in a little? I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, John. I just want to try to be fair.
Yeah. No problem.
Well, actually, this is this comes back to the first question, right? What's the difference between Imperium art and white art?
Mm.
Essentially what we're talking about, and I should also qualify that I wouldn't necessarily conflate the White Art Collective with Imperium art either.
Correct.
So I would say that there are elements of Imperium art in the White Art Collective, but I don't think that the White Art Collective, and we'll have Jeff on in the future, and he can opine on that more more in a more detailed manner. But suffice it to say, my interpretation, and I also want to qualify what I said before, I am not trying to shy away from a political message. And I am also not trying to disavow fascism or anything like that. That's not why I said what I said. What I am saying is that Imperium art incorporates elements from a wide variety of political thought, of identity, of nationalism, of various forms of interpretation, social and political interpretations, and there are simply some that are that have synergies with each other, and then there are others that are diametrically opposed to these concepts. So if someone's a Marxist, for example, then their whole worldview is diametrically opposed to tradition, to the continuity, to and again, when I say tradition, and I'm not speaking in a reactionary term, what I'm saying is contextualizing it in a historic context, understanding these threads and putting it in perspective and giving that providing us a context in order for us to draw from these historic and traditional elements to create something new for the future. So what I'm trying to say simply is that the difference between white art is you can have a Marxist who's white who creates art, and yeah, I guess that's white art if you want to put it in those terms. Although I don't think they would identify as such. But I don't see that kind of mentality in Imperium art whatsoever, and I don't see a place for that in Imperium art. I don't see deconstructive, destructive elements, parasitic elements in Imperium art. That's exactly one of the elements that I personally want to create a defensive mechanism and a defensive process for or against. So it's one of those questions, right, where we are creating, and again, Imperium art is right now a malleable concept. We're trying to figure out where we place Imperium art in the overall uh, dissident right sphere, how it reflects our expression, our aesthetics. Um, Now, getting back to that question of can someone who's a libertarian, for example, produce Imperium art? Well, of course they can produce Imperium art. That doesn't mean that their particular political leanings might be different than what they're producing. I mean, it can happen. But I want to go into again one of and I'm going to read this because this is from my essay to sort of kind of understand the message that I think might help provide an answer here. So I use T.S. Eliot as a foundational element of my essay, and so in this paragraph I'm saying, quote, drawing on T.S. Eliot's position on the relationship between religion and art, one can easily get lost in moral ambiguity without identifying a relationship between religion, nation, and art. Imperium art expands on Eliot's three categories of religious literature to include national identity. Firstly, explicit works of Imperium art blend literary qualities with a clear signal of divine or metaphysical moral inspiration as it relates to the European cultural and biological identity. This category is exemplified by sacred religious traditions, ancient sagas, heroic legends, national epics, mythology, and folk tales based on exclusively European foundations. Now, I'm going to stop for a second and say that someone who does this without the context of Imperium art, then it's not Imperium art. So for the sake of doing it, what we're talking about here is we're drawing on these foundations to create Imperium art. So as opposed to just recording these elements. Secondly, and I'm going to continue. Secondly, implicit works of art of Imperium art articulate the devotional work of art as expressed through treating the theme of Western culture and the metaphysical experience as part of the subject. So in this case, this category is exemplified by contemporary artists who draw upon the European foundational sources to create new artistic works related to the European biospirit. Thirdly, clear expressions of Western culture and the metaphysical experience as a form of propaganda. And this is exemplified through distinct expressions of the European conditions to promote a specific and clear targeted message. So what I'm trying to say with this is that in Imperium art, we're defining various aspects of it. And I think that, Donald, I think I showed you a video where these lovely ladies were singing Celtic folk songs.
Sure, it was beautiful. Yeah.
And it's beautiful. But the question is that Imperium art in and of itself?
Mm.
And the answer is no, it's not.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is, because it is a part of our tradition. So we have to, and it's at least my opinion, we have to appropriate this as Imperium art. So in other words, and this is where I'm kind of torn, right? So I'm saying that if you look at that, it's not really Imperium art. At least the artists are not creating Imperium art. But by the same token, it is Imperium art because it's ours. It's our tradition. So and I'll leave it up. So that's pretty much where I wanted to go with this.
I'm sorry, John. Let me just add something to that that's critical. When I was shown that video of these beautiful girls singing this music, I thought that is their natural indigenous music. When Europeans creating indigenous European art becomes a dissident act, then it is Imperium art. That when
precisely
you see, that's the point. And if your music, I don't know, if there's something uniquely European or Danish or something about it that speaks to your cultural crisis of replacement, and someone tries to shut you down or censor you or criticize you or hurt you in any way for it, I would categorize that as Imperium art. So, John, what are your responses?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting listening to you because it really deepens my understanding of it. But what I once again come to think about is on the one hand you have a sort of it seems like a fluent approach to Imperium Art, and on the other hand a very strict and you sort of seek, perhaps I'm mistaken, but you seek more or less formal set of rules, not or perhaps guidelines or what you might call it, but but and you say that this is Imperium, this is not Imperium. Will everything in the wider collective be defined as Imperium Art?
From my perspective, I define that as Imperium Art mostly.
Yeah.
Things that are just simple love songs or things that maybe don't speak directly to, white replacement. Doesn't have to be that. I have a song
Yeah.
on my YouTube channel that's just a love song. That's not Imperium Art.
Uh-huh.
But I think that I don't know. Maybe I'm making an assumption here, but you being the punk rocker that you are, maybe you don't like that.
Uh-huh.
You don't like walls. You want to be free. And artists should be free. We can't, how do I say? But at the same time, not so free that it becomes this nebulous postmodern garbage, right?
But I am a postmodernist.
Wow, we're in a very interesting conversation now. So,
I am.
okay, then you are in a very unique position then. What about your
I'm
art?
the kind of. Oh, sorry.
I'm so sorry to cut you off. I just want to ask you, what about your art do you think could qualify as or be defined as Imperium art?
Well, perhaps I don't know, Solferino, perhaps.
Hmm.
Perhaps that's the only song that I can maybe.
Well, let me ask
Yeah.
you, what's your interest with the White Art Collective? Why do you find that interesting or want to be a part of that?
Well, because I like people who reject the conformity of modern art. People who dare to say, "No, I don't want to be part of this conformist, this
Mhm.
conformist deplatforming."
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
in what way are you a
Yeah.
postmodernist?
Well, we make any kind of music or whatever that we feel like we want to do.
Okay.
We are, I mean, both me and Lilo are hedonists. We do whatever we please to do.
Hmm.
We're highly individualistic. No,
Mm,
nobody should tell us what we should do.
that's very European.
Um, Perhaps it is. I don't know. Yeah, perhaps it is. No. Europeans, they always obey the law. They're always like that. They're not as free as you might think.
Oh, I see. Well, maybe you're more
There's
American.
nothing free in Europe. There's
Oh,
nothing free in Europe.
okay. Mm.
So that is what I meant at the start of the show. I mean, you're gonna meet lots of people like me who are postmodernists and who will come to you and ask you what do you mean when you talk about Imperium Art?
Mm.
And I'm the friendly postmodernist that you
Yeah.
can use for target practice.
No. Well, this actually excites me a great deal because this question came up a while ago, like, can rap music be Imperium art, for example?
Yeah.
And right, Nullus has a lot to say on that, so I'm he's going to explode in a minute. Um, but my point is, So like I said, okay, if there was some way that they could subvert the medium to be pro-white, that yes, I would say so. If they can, in a sense, some kind of intelligent way, use the medium against itself in some regard. I mean, a medium and a message are not the same. Rap is simply, rhyming to poetry rhyming, right? And there's certain, but it's clearly, obviously, black culture, and I would never ever try to take that away. I think that there was a time when rap had much greater artistic value than today, but it seems to be very openly anti-white and anti-tradition and all these all that. So I'm getting off the topic a little bit, but I think that it remains to be seen. Can postmodernism and Imperium Art somehow connect? Ellis, do you have any thoughts?
Well, where should I begin? So, first of all, there's always this conflict between the individual, the let's say the creative soul of the individual, and the conformity of the collective, right? There's always a conflict. Artists will always have an external view, a more of in a way, an antisocial view of society. So they're going to always feel that they're on the outside looking in and observing what's going on, and for the most part. So by default, an artist will always have a leaning toward an individual expression, and this can be witnessed throughout history. The question is contextualizing this, funneling this energy into a collective goal is really what we're saying with Imperium Art. And what we're saying is that also there are elements that are quite obviously there to work against us and are anti-European, anti-white. And that's where, for example, I would say rap music is considered, my opinion at least, that was the root cause, and that's how the whole genre evolved. So to work within that, to me, is an anathema. I don't see that as a productive means to an end, and I know that I've ruffled a lot of feathers with that opinion. So let's just call that my hot take.
Okay.
But suffice. So the point is, though, that I also believe that we have many traditions of the spoken word put to music, where we can express ourselves without the need to jump into a foreign genre, especially a genre that was created against us. So I am very, and again, getting back to the individual versus the collective, um, you know, my opinion is that we have to work as a collective now. We have to work as a collective of individuals, if you want to put it in those terms. But I don't see Imperium Art as imposing rules on anyone. What I am saying is that Imperium Art will provide a context for someone who wants to express themselves this way. So if someone's a libertarian and they want to express themselves this way, then they're going to have to take a hard look in the mirror and ask themselves, why are they a libertarian? And I'll be quite honest with you, I really don't see any other path. I think liberalism is one of the main reasons we got into this mess in the first place. So, and again, but at the same time, I want to, give the artists that freedom to express themselves creatively. So it's a difficult balance, and it's something that we have to figure out in this whole project with Imperium Art.
I could jump ahead to an interesting question that flows right out of this conversation. This is another one of John's questions. What if a black guy makes pro-white art? Can he be Imperium Art? This is a direct quote there. So, this is a great question. This opens up a massive, how do I say? I don't want to say a can of worms, but it opens up a huge gray area that I enjoy talking about and I think is important to talk about, and that is Western alliances with people of color. Um, I'm going to just give you my answer to this, and you're free to challenge it or ask more questions, etc. But I believe identity is essentially part DNA and part culture. And so, I've used this analogy many times. So, a Chinese baby is adopted by a white family. Its DNA is Chinese, its culture is white. And if you took that person as an adult and forced them back to live in China, they would be an absolute alien. They don't speak the language, share the values, know the customs. Yet, there is something to say for the Chinese biospirit, as there is the European biospirit, or Asian biospirit, etc. So it's not extremely easy to define. However, I do like the idea of recognizing or giving a platform or a gateway for people of color or people who are biracial, partly white, to protect Western civilization. They are from it, they are of it, they enjoy the benefits of it, and therefore, they should protect the people who embody that, which are Europeans. So, if I wanted to protect Tibetan culture, who would I protect? The Tibetan people, right? They embody it. It's the same thing for people of European descent. So, yes, I would say yes, a black guy can make Imperium art. What do you think about that, John?
Yeah, yeah. I think that answers my question.
Is that
yeah,
punk rock enough?
Yeah,
No.
it is. well, it suits me. Yeah. Because that's what my question was intended to sort of see. Is it? I mean, the difference between YR and Imperium Art, as you talk about here, that the black guy couldn't perhaps make YR if you define YR as made by a white person, but he could make Imperium Art. And yeah, there we have, that's a great distinction there that I think I think people would really understand and appreciate that. I think so. I think that's personally, I think that's a very good approach to Imperium Art.
And there's room for disagreement. I mean, it's not the Donald Kent show. I mean, this is a concept that we're all co-authoring, specifically people in the White Art Collective, who've made a point to make explicitly white conscious art for white well-being. Nullus, do you have any thoughts on that topic?
Yes, I do. And my answer is no. I don't see that. I see Imperium Art as something exclusively European and white. I see that as something that is something that we have to establish as a means for us to find unity among ourselves. Alliances and again, I'm not in principle, I'm not against the idea and the concept of forging alliances at some point. But I believe that we are not in a position right now to focus on that. And I think that even bringing this up now at a point where we are not even unified among ourselves, I think is taking energy away from the goal that we need to find unity first. My biggest problem is, and again, maybe I should qualify a few things. I'm looking at this through the lens of a nationalist, and I'm looking at this through the lens of a person who is very highly critical of humanism, the Enlightenment, liberalism as such, and also very highly critical of Marxism and all their derivative ideologies. So this is where I'm taking my point of departure. And as a nationalist, so for me, if I had somebody who was from anywhere, Chinese or black or whatever, producing Hungarian art, for example, it's never going to be Hungarian art. I'm never going to view it as such. But I will say that, oh, here's a guy who's doing something that's novel and, sympathetic to us, and that's a great thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's Hungarian. And that's how I sort of see it with an Imperium art as well. I would say that the idea of having someone being sympathetic and a fellow traveler is a good thing. But I would not say that they belong in the realm of Imperium art. I think that has to be exclusively for us. That has to be something that we need to develop and evolve. Because if we incorporate these other elements, then we're already diluting the whole project. And I think that when you have someone who grew up in, let's say, like you used, Donald, the example of someone of Chinese descent growing up in the West, let's say with a white family or what have you, and they're fully immersed in this Western culture, quote unquote, um, you're still going to have a different perspective because their complete identity is going to be that of someone who is in it, but kind of outside of it as well. And not in an artistic way outside of it, but in a cultural way outside of it. So they're always going to feel they're a little different, and that's going to be expressed in their art. And so again, I'm not against the concept of being sympathetic or saying, well, here's somebody who's created something that's positive, that's, let's say, white positive or what have you, but I would not call it Imperium art.
So again, these question, John has another question that flows really, really well with this particular topic. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. He says that if Lilou and John make hip hop celebrating Homer from a classical European perspective, can that be Imperium art? I think Nullus, you can take that one.
John, I love you like a brother, but the answer is no. And we have to have, and maybe this is a good point to bring up. We have to be a little bit discriminating in what it is that we want in Imperium art. We have to be, and again, this isn't against, as an artist, John, obviously you're free to express yourself whichever way comes naturally to you. I'm not here to police your art. Um, what I am saying, though, is that can you have a piece that belongs to Imperium art? Yes. Does that mean all of your work would be within the realm of Imperium art? No. Is that a bad thing? No. But it is what it is. It's just the simple reality that now, if you want to define yourself as an Imperium artist, so to speak, then that changes the parameters, right? Then you have to work within the context of what Imperium art is meant to achieve. In my view, at least, rap music is like I said before, was created with the specific intention of deconstructing Western and European and white society. So, in my view, using that for what, even if it's creatively and the message is a positive, white positive message, I still believe that using that genre um, is not Imperium art. It can be dissident art if you want to use it as a form of parody or satire. It can be used as dissident right art if you want to put it in those terms. There are rap artists out there that have been doing dissident right art and using rap as their vehicle. So but I would not call that Imperium art.
You, can I add something to that? You make a very good point here, Nullus. And by the way, I love you like a brother too. So we had a conversation on Twitter, you and I, Nullus, where I called you a snob. And to me, snob is just a technical term. You're a wonderful snob. And I think snobbery. I think snobbery is something that should be embraced because a snob in a way means somebody who sees quality and who isn't afraid to say I see quality. That's my first. That's that's my first reaction. You you journalists have more when you look at Imperium Art, you see a smaller movement than perhaps what Donald does, and I think that's perfectly in order. And the other thing you say, Nullus, is you talk about dissident art. And one suggestion, if I may come with a suggestion, is that defining Imperium art in relation with dissident art, for example. You said, Donald, that you didn't want a left-winger to come and define what it is that you do, for example. You didn't want somebody who is hostile toward you come and define what you are doing here. A good way of moving forward, I think, would be perhaps to talk about what is not Imperium art, but is still perhaps could be in the White Art Collective, perhaps, and give names to those too, because that would make a more clear definition of what Imperium art is. Because that would say, okay, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, because these are genres of their own. Mm-hmm. This is Imperium art.
Mm-hmm. If I may just quickly interject, Donald.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So you know, when I first hear the word snob, I always think of a negative, pejorative way of defining it. But then, you know, you think about it. When it comes to Imperium art, we do have to feel that it is superior to other art forms. And so there has to be, so there's two definitions of being a snob, just for general edification for myself as well. You know, I actually feel that I don't look down upon other genres. So in that sense, I'm not really a snob in that sense. I just say that ours has to be the best. We have to rise above it. There has to be a certain elite. There has to be a certain elite element to Imperium art. The word Imperium, in and of itself, already suggests a certain kind of approach to creating an elite art within the sphere of the dissident right art world. So maybe one could say that WAC, the White Art Collective, is a dissident right artistic movement. Within that collective, there are dissident right expressions of art, and then there are more Imperium art expressions. I think that that might be a good way of distinguishing the two. And I think that that might be, and I think, John, you mentioned it, we chatted about this a while back, and I think that that might be an important distinguishing factor in helping define what Imperium art is.
I would also invite people from the White Art Collective to kind of come forward and say, you know, I don't identify with this idea, or challenge us if they need to, you know, if they want to or need to. This is evolving, and we're co-authoring it. We are the ones who are making arts that are white positive, that are for white well-being explicitly. And so it's our discussion, you know, in-house, so to speak.
Yeah, and Donald, if I can add to that, I think that we're not saying that every work of art has to be Imperium art, and we're also not saying that every artist should be exclusively an Imperium artist. I mean, it would be nice, but I'm not saying that that's a necessary factor. I think that you can create various forms of art, like you even said yourself. You wrote a love song. Now, again, you know, we can be a little bit more discriminating about it, and we can say what defines is Imperium art a form of high art, or is it a form of, or is it more of an expression to help provide people with a means to contextualize their specific aesthetic expression?
Hmm. So, unless John wants to continue on that one, the next question that he has it really fits this beautifully. Um, so he's
Please go
asking,
ahead.
okay, John's asking us to give examples of Imperium art from contemporary artists. He's asking, or is it just the classics? They have already been written, So, um, and I look at, say, just for example, the music of Jack White or Hyreth, and I'm deeply, deeply moved and inspired. I think these two songwriters have extremely evolved understandings of their own aesthetics, their own voice, the themes and the ways in which they say what they say. I think of them as kind of like the crowning jewels of the White Art Collective in many ways. Then you have someone like Traversing the Divide, who is an uber genius musician. Like his brain won't fit through the door. He's so amazingly smart at music, but yet there's no words to any of it. And so, but it doesn't need words per se. That it's a kind of epic poetry that comes across in his music. It shows the genius of the European mind as well. So half of asking what is Imperium art is the ability to critique art, is the ability to have maybe Imperium critique ability, the ears and the eyes to sense the European biospirit in a work of art. Um, so there's a lot of aspects here. Intent is extremely central to all kinds of art. Okay, if let's say, I don't know, I paint. Let's say you look at, oh, I don't know, you could say a picture of a painting of an ox in a Chinese museum, and you go, oh, it's just an ox. Well, if you knew Buddhism, you would know that the ox represents the struggle towards enlightenment. You see what I'm saying? So if you don't know the symbolisms and the intent and the context of the artist, the art, and the culture, it's very hard to pin that down and answer that question. So I'm kind of making it more difficult to answer by saying that. But art is art. It still has the same kind of definitions and approaches and critiques. John, did you want to respond to that?
No, I think yeah. I think uh, I think that was a good answer. Um, I think um, I think you shouldn't be afraid to for that Imperium critique, as you put it, and to distinguish between what is and what is not Imperium art, and be very and state that very clearly and straightforward, because that will make the entire Imperium art concept be more respected, I think. And one of the things that I like about Imperium art, because there are many things in it that I really appreciate,
Mm-hmm.
is one of the things that I really appreciate is that you define what you think is good taste, and you're not ashamed of saying this is good taste, and
Mm-hmm.
you formalize it in a way, even if you aren't that strict, or some may be and some may not be, but you can discuss it together. What is good art according to you? Um, and I think that is something that appeals to me. At the same time, as I'm very, at the same time as I appreciate that I can say that no, I'm not Imperium Art. Lilou John is not Imperium Art, because we don't. Uh, we don't do the kind of music that would really fit into Imperium Art. And I don't want to I don't want you to sort of expand the concept just so we could fit in. So one of my key points here is to sort of narrow it down to the
Yes.
central elements of Imperium Art, and then we can say that, okay, we're not Imperium Art, but that's okay. I don't care about that.
Sure. Sure.
I respect Imperium Art, so there's no problem in that. But one thing that comes to mind is whenever you formalize something and you formalize art, how do you stop it from losing its creativity? Because I mean, creativity, when we make music and we want to go anywhere, just anywhere, we want to do music about anything.
Yes.
And if you can't do that, we feel like, oh crap.
I can speak to that. I think I can answer what your question.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. It's really critical to observe the art too. So Imperium Art is very much an academic observation of the event of white positive arts that are happening. So it's a kind of a record of it. But at the same time, because we're in it and making it, we also get to choose the direction of it as well. And that's why we're constantly asking people in the White Art Collective and beyond to co-author that with us. And we're extremely grateful for your challenging us with all these interesting questions. So you have to have form to some extent, right? But you have to have freedom. So we had this discussion on the Warrior Poets episode of Nullus's show, whereby you essentially have to have principles and elements, taste, as you say, and these other things, and then it's up to you where you go from there. So if you listen to Traversing the Divides music and compare it to Jack White's music, that's like radically different. There's massive amounts of freedom in that range just between those two. So, but once again, they both have the intent to moralize white people in the crisis of white replacement, you see. So does that help? I don't know if I've completely
Donald,
Yeah.
if I can interrupt quickly,
Go for it.
I'd like to circle back again to that paragraph that I read before.
Okay.
So this is an interesting thing, and again, we're trying to figure this out. So we're not fully formed. We're also questioning ourselves, and we're also trying to figure and understand what it is that we're trying to achieve here. And I think that we have the core message and we have the diagnosis, and now we're trying to find the treatment, so to speak. And so what I'm looking at is Imperium Art serving two purposes, essentially. One is the existential realm, where someone like John and Lilou and John can speak with me, and where we can find inspiration and draw from each other through our respective experiences and our backgrounds, and perhaps inspire each other to create something, or even collaborate on something, or perhaps even share experiences from our respective backgrounds and cultures to enrich each other and give each other a little bit of a better understanding of where we're coming from. So I think that an element of Imperium Art is more of an esoteric kind of an existential reality, so to speak. I don't even know if we could call that Imperium Art per se, more of a meeting place. I think that probably falls in line with what the White Art Collective is trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. And I also believe that this is an important element of Imperium Art. Again, looking at it from the lens of a nationalist, I am, quote unquote, ambassador of my culture. I'm a representative of that, and my job is to show that to the rest of our community and provide some context so that they can know where I'm coming from. And so that's one aspect of Imperium art. Whether or not this is more of a practical consideration, again, and more of a guideline as opposed to a rule, something that we have to figure out. Now, then you have the other aspect, which is where Donald and I agree with Donald completely, is addressing the immediate and real issues that we're confronting today, and that's the demographic catastrophe, that is the moral bankruptcy, that is the nihilism, the materialism, all of these things that are surrounding us on a daily basis, and how we as artists can express ourselves and find a way to provide meaning to these things in this absolute ocean of degeneracy. I mean, so it's a very difficult question that we're trying to find answers to. So let me circle back here. And again, I had these three categories. So you were saying, if we had an ancient Greek play, or a poem from the Middle Ages, or a song from the 17th century, is that Imperium art? Well, it is and it isn't. It is because it's ours. It is because it belongs to our continuity. It is Imperium art if we contextualize it as Imperium art. And I look at these almost in and if you look at ancient mythology and religious symbolisms going back over the eons, all of these are a part of our traditions, our condition, our continuity. So there's something that we need to have as an integral part of who we are. And so that does form the aspect, I would say, the sacred aspect of Imperium art. And then you have the expressions and things like what Hyrith does, or Jack White, or Traversing the Divide. What they're all doing is they're creating and drawing upon these traditions to create something new. And they're providing a context for it in our contemporary world. But they're not explicitly, at least not in every song, explicitly speaking about these things. They're using those elements and they're fusing those elements into their art, and that's how they're expressing something new for our contemporary society. And that to me is also Imperium art. Then you have very clear expressions that are more propagandistic, and I'll use my own poem as an example, which is, that the Sun in Time poem, for example, is a very clear propagandistic poem. It's a poem that is calling people to unify, to get together, to stand together, shoulder to shoulder, in confronting all of these attacks. So we are explicitly saying something to our community in very clear ways, and I think that's another expression of Imperium art. So I think that it all depends on how it's created. Now, Lilou and John will have a song, or Donald, or even I might have a poem that is not necessarily related to it. It could be a love poem or a love song, or it could be something that's not necessarily related to any of these topics. Then one has to ask the question, well, is it or isn't it Imperium art? Because if we're looking at an ancient Greek tragedy as a part of Imperium art, then maybe love poems are a part of Imperium art. The question is, in what context was that love poem written, and what message does that love poem have to say? If it's and I think that's where it gets a little interesting. But to close what I want to say here, I still believe, and I agree with John, in the exclusivity of Imperium Art. I think it would be a wise decision for us to find ways to define ourselves
Yeah.
separately from dissident right art, but not exclusively. So I think that someone can do both. But I'm just saying that
Right.
we have to keep there has to be a Chinese wall, so to speak, between the two.
So, John, how do you feel about these answers so far? Do you feel that you're satisfied with these answers, or do they just create more questions? Do you have any doubts?
I think it's perfect. I think you have managed to answer. I think all of my questions.
There's more though in the list.
Yeah.
Oh
I
wait,
know.
there's
Well, two of the things that I come to think of is first, if you look at it from a traditionalist or reactionary perspective, you have this. We talked about snobbery analysis. I think about authority,
Hmm.
and in order for Imperium Art to sort of really embrace that reactionary traditionalist, to sort of express that traditionalism. Uh, it's, I mean, Nullus, you talk about Imperium Art. You are perhaps the driving forces behind Imperium Art. So it should only be fair, from my point of view, if you sort of set out the guidelines, and if people want to comment on them, do so. But you stick to the guidelines for Imperium Art,
Hmm.
um, and embrace that authority, because that would the message that you're conveying with Imperium Art. And on the other, and secondly, I would like to have some kind of prime example of what is Imperium Art at its peak. I mean, is there a poem? Is there
I
a
I have
song?
to
Is there
jump
a
in.
painting? Is there something that is the peak of Imperium Art?
I can't say this is, it's not for me to say this, but I'm working on making art that is exemplary of Imperium art. And the kind of the main image that's tagged at the top of my Twitter, for example, is so if you happen to have your computer open and you can look at my Twitter account, you'll see an example there. And this is made up of a lot of the discussions that we've had, Nullus and I, with very many people. And I think again, it's an exemplar. As an artist, I really have to let others critique it. It's done and it's out there, and so, but
Yeah.
that's my interpretation of like what let's say maybe good Imperium art would be. However,
Yeah.
this is something that's growing and evolving, and half of it is an academic review of what exists, and then the other half is like the branches, saying like, where is this going to go? How do we cultivate this in a
Hmm.
direction that wakes up the white imperium globally so that we save ourselves from replacement? So in fact, one of your questions here is, let me grab this here. Who will decide the formalized rules for what is and what is not Imperium art? I think it's pretty clear that Nullis would say, well, us, we're the ones. Um,
Mhm.
I think for me, the first thing that jumps out is the formalized rules, though, not who's going to decide them. Because as an artist, specifically a visual artist, I that means everything. That means a lot. The questions of what are the topics, the themes, the methods. I could even get into process. The process of painting, the symbolism in colors. There's just so much. What kind of materials, spaces, architecture. There's very, very much in there. And my personal answer as an Imperium artist is that so long as you are plugged in to your culture and your history, your ethnicity, and you have those themes, symbols, myths, religion, values, traditions to draw from, you you create your own rules, so to speak. Um, I think again, it always comes back to that root. Are we waking up our people? Are we calling to our people globally to wake up, stand up, stop white replacement? And the formal rules have, they're kind of like the tools. If you're doing surgery on a dying man, you have to have the right surgical tools to keep him alive. Well, that's the same thing. The tools that you use in your art, they have to fit the job. So that's an exciting concept, I think. What are your thoughts, John?
I think you should have a number of people, and I would choose, if I were you, a symbolic number that has that a symbolic number,
Mm.
7. I don't know. Who are the sort of well, the judges, the ones who say what is and what is not Imperium art, and who look at it from different viewpoints, but who define Imperium art. Because, as I said, Imperium art to me, and traditionalism, the reactionary sentiments, to me, that means in some way authoritarian, and authority should be part of it, at least the way I look, at least the way I look at it. If you are sort of counteracting modern or postmodern art, that would be a very good thing. If you sort of think of yourselves as the opposite of postmodern art, then it should be an authority that decides what is not. That's at least what I think. That's my initial reaction.
That's excellent advice. That's very, very good advice. So I think that actually should be a topic of another show. Something I've chatted a little bit with Kai Moros about, and he is very adamant about design and architecture being central to Imperium art. And I don't disagree with that, but he would say even more so than, say, visual art and music. And his thinking is more about what do the cities look like, where people live who are part of the culture of the Imperium art. And I thought, wow, that blew my mind. That's very, very forward thinking. That's futuristic in some sense. So it's a massive topic. I think we'll set that aside for another show. So I'll unless Nullus wants to jump in, I'll move on to the next question.
No, you can move on.
Okay, so I find this funny. John's asking, is Fashwave Imperium art? I would say yes with like 100 exclamation points behind it. I mean, it's crazy the intensity that you feel from Fashwave, depending on like the video that's with it, maybe clips from the anime Jinro, with all of that. It really takes your anger and it crystallizes it into this kind of intense power. And yeah, it's very moralizing. It's very collectivist. It's very nationalistic. And there's also that kind of funny 1980s synthwave kind of retro idealism that comes out of it as well, which I sort of find campy and a little funny. Like I enjoy synthwave now, but at first I was like, why are we listening to the Terminator soundtrack? When I first came across that. But I don't know, Nullus, what are your thoughts? Is Fashwave Imperium art?
Yes, but before, I'm sorry I have to go back because I was just thinking while you were speaking about the question of authority quickly, and also the question of what Imperium means to me. And I would have to say that the first thing that comes to my mind is the Holy Roman Empire, um, above anything else. And the reason I use that as an example is because you have a collection of independent states that form the empire together, and they choose their emperor, so to speak. Right now, we're not talking about choosing an emperor for Imperium Art or anything like that. But what we are saying is that we have a number of different nations within one group, within one family, and that's the European diaspora. And so within that, the Imperium itself is the collection of these nations. And so that's where I see the Holy Roman Empire as an interesting model. Um, Now, in terms of authority, I agree with John. Now, and we also have to define uh, sort of being a discriminating in terms of what we define as Imperium Art. It doesn't mean that we should be exclusive to the artists, but we should be exclusive to the art. I think that's maybe a better way of putting it. So John, even though he might not identify with Imperium Art, could create an Imperium work of Imperium Art. Now, I think that's a good idea to have some kind of authority over it. I think what Donald and I are working on now is trying to see what kind of input we're getting from the general public and getting a better understanding ourselves of where we want to take this. But ultimately, I do agree that we should have some kind of an authority on defining what is and what isn't Imperium Art, which Donald and I are playfully doing at the moment. We're sending each other messages or posting stuff and asking, "Is this Imperium Art?"
Yes,
And I think that that's a good exercise.
we're the Frankfurt School of white
Oh.
identity politics.
Yeah, well, you could. Oh, please don't.
That's a
No, no,
horrible
no, no,
analogy.
no, no. I disavow.
I know. I'm totally joking. That
I
was just
disavow. No,
that
but I get it. I get it.
yeah.
So like, but then you have, and then now I want to segue to the Fash Wave question. That's a very specific genre. So I would say that if you're creating that kind of music, then that I could say, yeah, that could fit into Imperium Art because the entire genre is about this. And so you can say that again, and not everyone who writes who creates Fash Wave does that exclusively. Maybe they do other things. So so I think that saying that Fash Wave as a genre is a part of Imperium Art, I would say unequivocally, yes, it is. Yeah.
Mm.
Could it? Yeah.
Go ahead, John. I'm sorry to cut you off. I just wanted.
Yeah. One more suggestion I have listening to you here, Nullus, is I think it's quite fascinating, Jonathan Haidt's 5 moral foundations of liberals and conservatives, where care and fairness are liberal moral foundations. He says care, fairness, in-group loyalty, authority, and purity are conservative moral foundations. And I have taken it one step further, and I think more or less than in-group loyalty, authority, and purity are more reactionary moral foundations. And if you're moving forward with Imperium Art, perhaps it just as a suggestion here, loyalty, in-group loyalty, authority, and purity. These 3 perhaps moral foundations could perhaps also help you forward with Imperium Art.
Good suggestion. Yeah.
Just an idea I came up with.
Very nice. Yeah, this is definitely. I think Nullus and I probably can break that down as well. That's really, really well done. To look at your questions here, honestly, we have answered a lot of them. So it's maybe not necessary to read every single one, since we've already covered a lot of the topics. But I do think you came up with a fascinating point comparing Plato and Aristotle. So your question is that Imperium Art reminds one of Plato's ideas. Into my ears, what would an Aristotelian say? Is it even applicable to this? So Plato being idealism, Aristotle being actual, or maybe realistic. I don't know if, John, you could expand on that question, make it a little more clear for
Yeah,
us.
I think you answered it. I
Mm.
think you answered quite well when you said that Harif and Jack White, for example, could be expressions of Imperium Art. Then you then, then you made it an actuality, and because what I was looking for was what kind of music, kind of art, and you showed me the painting you had on your Twitter too,
Mhm.
as a representation of Imperium Art. So I think you have already answered that question, because this whole discussion has made me understand that yes, it is applicable to an Aristotelian as well, and as an Aristotelian, I can understand it too
Mhm.
and relate to it, and see what you actually mean
Okay.
when you say Imperium Art.
Mhm.
So I think you did quite a good job here.
Well, so I guess I would ask you then one last question, and this is not something you have to answer now, but hopefully in future conversations you could bring something to the table. That is, how does a postmodernist become or create Imperium Art? So, I mean, I think that's kind of a nice question for you, with your angle and everything. And then, maybe we can, if you
Well,
want, take a shot
because
at that now, or
yeah,
okay.
yeah, I can answer that quite and immediately. I think Imperium Art is very fascinating. I think it's extremely fascinating, and I can see that some of the songs that we have written could perhaps be, perhaps I will have to turn to the authorities to sort of
Yes,
know if it is
counselors,
Imperium Art or not. But some of
the,
us could
the
perhaps
wonderful
be
snob.
like that, and yeah.
That's the name
so
of our
so
new
so
band, by the way.
so
Wonderful snobs.
yeah. And it's inspiring, and I could easily talk to Lilou about creating songs that that celebrated or expressed Imperium Art,
Hmm.
and I know that Lilou find it extremely fascinating to do that as well,
Mhm.
uh, but uh, only if we find it amusing when we're at it, because we do what we think is amusing for the time being. And if we don't find it amusing enough, we don't do it.
Mm.
So that could perhaps answer your question. As a postmodernist, we always follow. Our main question is always, what is most fun to create? What is most inspiring to create? We create that.
Mm. Well,
Donald, if
What
I could
is
just,
what
yeah,
is new? What is new? Yeah.
okay. Now,
maybe, maybe a way to express this properly would be to say the following. The expression of Imperium art has to be discriminating, it has to be specific, it has to have a structure to it. The realm surrounding Imperium art should be inspiring, it should be collaborative, it should be a place where people can meet and learn from each other. And so my goal, I would say, with Imperium Art would be to provide a place for people to express themselves artistically in the context that we're providing, but also to inspire others to create works that may not necessarily fall in Imperium Art, but definitely have a relationship to Imperium Art. And just finally, I just wanted to add that, um, John, I mean, the White Eagle, in my opinion, is Imperium Art. Just, and Free Woman, in my
Okay.
opinion. And Free Woman is also Imperium Art, in my opinion. Those two songs,
Okay.
because
Thank
I
you.
think those have very, very specific messages, and they're very compelling messages. So I think that maybe, subconsciously you're more of an Imperium artist than you realize.
Hmm.
Perhaps.
Fascinating. Well, on that note, I want to thank you, John, very, very, very much for joining us, for putting your time and energy into this. We're extremely grateful, and on behalf of everyone in the white identity sphere, we're grateful. So it's not good to be in a kind of political echo chamber or a creative echo chamber where everybody just agrees with each other or tries to have a cool hot take on things. This we want to have, you know, an academic integrity to what we're doing, and we can't do that without people challenging the ideas. So we're very grateful to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Okay, so I
Yes,
will
thank
put,
you.
yeah, I'll put links to John's music below, and Nullus's show, my links, etc. So we thank you all very much for spending your time, and please leave your comments below, and we will catch you on the next episode of Imperium Art. Thank you.